When you pull the axle shaft out of the differential, you may notice there's an O-ring in the C-clip retainer groove. If it's missing, it either broke off and got ground up by the gears, or someone worked on the differential before you and didn't bother putting it back in. Which leads me to answer the question that is the title of this video. If the O-rings are missing or you just want to install new ones, the part number is -017. But they are not necessary. If they are missing, you don't need to replace them. And if they're present, you could take them off and throw them away. Whether you have O-rings in that C-clip groove or not, it will not affect the operation of the differential in any way. The only function they serve is to hold the C-clip in its groove so they don't hang up on a counterbore when you pull the axle back to its proper location. Now you might be disappointed with my answer because the part number I gave you was not a Ford part number. It's a generic part number for O-rings based on their size, commonly known as an O-ring dash number. And as for my statement that the O-rings aren't needed, well, that's my opinion, and we all know what opinions are worth. But if you watch the rest of the video, I'll show you why I answered the way I did, and then you can draw your own conclusions and form your own opinion. Alright, so here I am pulling the axle shafts, because I have to replace the wheel bearings. And this is the first time the axle shafts have ever been removed. I know this because I bought the car brand new in 2002, and I'm the only one that's ever done any work on it. And as expected, there's an O-ring in the U-washer groove, but it doesn't look so good. Now here I removed the O-ring and wiped down the axle shaft with some gasoline. And now that I removed the O-ring, you can see it a little better. It's a bit deformed, elongated and flattened out on opposite sides. So if this part's at all critical, it should be replaced. But when I looked it up in the Ford factory manual, they don't list a part number. However, they do mention it twice. Once in the steps for removing the axle shaft, and again in the steps for installing the axle shaft. And the statement, verbatim, is, "Caution, do not damage the rubber O-ring in the axle shaft groove." Now, although I didn't damage it, the O-ring is damaged. And it got damaged by the very nature of its application. It gets compressed by the C-clip, or as Ford calls it, the U-washer, which deforms it. Nonetheless, it's damaged, and I couldn't find a part number, so I measured it. And it measures to have a 3/4 inch ID and a 1/16 diameter cross-section, which is the exact size of a -018 O-ring. I looked through my stash for O-rings, and I had no -018s, but I did have some -017s. A -017 has the same cross-section diameter of 1/16, but the ID is 11/16 of an inch, 1/16 smaller. Besides, the original O-ring that I measured was loose in its groove. So aside from being deformed, it was probably stretched as well. So this -017 O-ring with an 11/16 ID might actually be a better fit. And it goes in the groove nice and snug. And you can see it works just fine. It keeps the U-washer from falling out of the groove, which is apparently its only purpose, and it only matters when you're installing the axle shaft. Because once the axle shaft's installed, the U-washer is seated in the counterbore, and the pinion pin holds everything in place, making it impossible for the U-washer to fall out of its groove. And there you have it. The O-ring is not a critical part. It's basically just an installation aid. So there really wouldn't be any issues in using the old deformed O-ring over again, or leaving it out entirely if it was missing. In that case, just make sure the U is pointing down, or use some grease to hold it in place. If I didn't have one lying around, I wouldn't waste my time going to an auto parts store or plumbing supply to get a new one, because once the axle shafts are back in, it doesn't really make a difference if the O-rings are in there or not.